Okay, hello everyone. I'm Stephanie Bruder, President of UN Women USA New York, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation, the final in the series, Black and Women in America, a series led by Meisha Williams Bertels and developed by an amazing group, including Laura Stevens, Clarissa Kuo, Ama Aye, Kelly Thorgrimson, Manisha Serene, Kaylee Roshich, Cynthia Gregoric, Melissa Laurie, and many more of our amazing members. It has been a powerful journey and one that we will carry forward personally and in the work of the chapter. And tonight is a special indeed, a conversation on mental health with profoundly inspiring women. I would like to share a passage from the Beijing Declaration. If I can just move my screen forward. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. A major barrier for women is inequality, both between men and women among women in different geographical regions, social classes, and indigenous and ethnic groups. Mental disorders related to marginalization, powerlessness, and poverty, along with overwork and stress, and the growing incidence of domestic violence, as well as substance abuse, are among other health issues of growing concern to women. Well, this declaration, written 25 years ago, rings so true today and is a roadmap to our collective mission for equality. Among its many programs, one immediate way that UN Women provides resources for mental health is through crisis centers in many regions. For each woman, healing from trauma is a unique journey, but it always begins with sharing. And here are the voices of participants in Nepal, Papua New Guinea, and Benin. I wanted someone to understand. I opened up. No woman should go through this alone. So before I introduce these incredible speakers tonight, I just wanted to thank every member of this audience for joining us, and particularly congratulate and celebrate those donors who have contributed to UN Women programs. We are so pleased to be giving away a t-shirt as well as a $100 gift card to So Hooked Wellness Marketplace to two of our donors. And if you'd like to enter that raffle, you can still text women to 917-924-8065, which will also be in your chat, in order to donate to some of these UN Women programs. And to give you a sense of how your donation helps right now, a $35 donation would purchase a dignity kit for a woman at the refugee camps in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, where 10,000 households have been destroyed. And women need basic things like the abava, a garment, sanitary napkins, shoes, toothbrush, comb. So all of these things will go into a dignity kit. So that just gives you a sense. But if you donate at any amount, you're entered to win. And I also we would love for you to send your questions to our speakers, and we encourage you to reach out to Kelly in the Q&A portion. And if your question is selected, you will receive a signed copy of Kaeja Lane's newest book, Free to Dance, a suicide survivor's memoir. So very excited about that one. And with that, I am honored to introduce our speakers this evening. Dr. Oni Blackstock is a thought leader and influencer in HIV and health equity. She's a primary care and HIV physician and the founder and executive director of Health Justice, which helps healthcare and public health organizations center anti-racism and equity in their workplace culture and reduce health inequities in the communities they serve. She served as assistant commissioner at the New York City Health Department and led the city's response to the HIV epidemic. She holds degrees from Harvard College, Harvard Medical School, and Yale School of Medicine, and is passionate about ensuring that all individuals and communities have the resources and support they need to achieve optimum health and well-being. Dr. Thema Bryant-Davis is a professor of psychology at Pepperdine University, a former psychology representative at the United Nations, and a past president of the Society of the Psychology of Women. She hosts the Homecoming podcast and has been a mental health expert on CNN, WeTV, OWN TV, CBS, and VH1. Dr. Thema directs the Culture and Trauma Research Lab, and her expertise is in empowering people to survive, heal, and thrive. She's the author of Thriving in the Wake of Trauma, a multicultural guide. Dr. Thema is also an activist, spoken word artist, and sacred dancer who is an ordained elder. She's committed to anti-oppression, liberatory approaches to holistic wellness. And Kaeja Lane is a retired US Army commissioned military police officer with over 20 years of active duty military service. She served as the executive officer for the Army Suicide Prevention Office and as a military strategist for former Army Secretary, Congressman John McHugh. She served as a Defense Congressional Fellow in the office of the late Congressman Elijah Cummings. Among many assignments, her most rewarding was as company commander deploying a combat military police company in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Kaeja served as the Director of Veterans Health Legislative Affairs at the VA, leading a team on women veterans and minority veterans health, behavioral and mental health, veterans homelessness, suicide prevention, and substance abuse. An advocate for suicide prevention and awareness, and a supporter of suicide survivors, her own story of the loss of her husband is one of help, healing, and hope after tragedy. She's held leadership positions as a biblical researcher and instructs liturgical dance ministry and leadership, which is her passion. A graduate of Armstrong, Atlantic State, Old Dominion, and Georgetown, Kaeja is the author of several books, most recently Free to Dance, a suicide survivor's memoir, and she is a PhD candidate completing her dissertation in organizational leadership at Regent University. Our moderator, Meisha Williams-Bertels, is an experienced digital strategist and social impact advocate. Her mission is to tell authentic stories powered by insights to connect her clients to their audience. Meisha draws on a rich experience in marketing, tech, entertainment, and activism to create meaningful content and programming. In her work with UN Women USA New York, she serves as our marketing chair and has spearheaded this Black and Women in America series to spotlight topics such as working, voting, mental health, and LGBTQIA+ issues facing Black women today. Meisha, thank you for leading this series. Please take it away.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, panel. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Tonight is our final installment of Black and Women. And I'm super proud to have Dr. Thema, Dr. Blackstock, and Kaeja join us this evening. And as Stephanie so eloquently said, we will be discussing the topic of mental health. This series was designed to foster honest and raw conversations, and we are certainly going to do that for you tonight. And I don't want to waste any more time. I would love to start the conversation. If Kelly or Stephanie, thank you. I would like everyone to look at the screen and take in this quote. The truth is that I have suffered long bouts of depression since fill in the blank. And I've had a really hard time coping with fill in the blank. This was actually a statement from Naomi Osaka, who withdrew from the French Open last week just because she put herself first. I can't even make this up, right? But this is such a timely topic and so needed that I would like to open up with, start a discussion, if you will, with our panel just to ask, how do you ladies feel about a woman standing up and saying, enough's enough, I need to take care of me? And more so, how do you feel that this is a Black woman standing up on a national, not even a national, but a global stage, putting forth the topic of mental health? Would Dr. Blackstock like to start?
Sure, and thank you so much to Young Women USA for the invitation to be on this panel, and I'm so excited to be here with my co-panelists. I was, super excited to hear about, Naomi's announcement. I think society expects 24/7 access to Black women. They feel entitled to much of our time and our talent, and so it was very refreshing, and I think much needed to see a young Black woman who I think seems so level-headed and well-adjusted, really expressing what her needs are, and setting up boundaries to take care of herself and her needs versus the needs of others. So I was very encouraged and heartened by her example.
Dr.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad to be here. And it is so fitting that we would start with the experience of Naomi. And what it reminds me of is the Harlem Renaissance poem that says, "We wear the mask that grins and lies, it hides our teeth and shades our eyes." And many times people don't know the pain that Black women and girls are in. We have been taught as a strategy of survival to not let people see your weakness, to not let people see your vulnerability, to not let people see your struggle. And this has been since our time here in these United States. And then when we also look at globally, the realities of colonization, that often we have been equated, our worth has been equated with our labor. And so there is this press to always perform. And it also is this capitalistic notion that if you have money and fame, you will be happy and joyful all the time, which we know is not true. And so I appreciate her strength in showing her vulnerability. And it is a lesson to all of us, and especially to those who care about Black women, to not assume. Even when we show up in these virtual spaces, in each box, there is a story, there is a narrative that some people had to fight to get out of bed just to log in, or might be logged in from the bed. And people often do not know. And so for us to respond with the realities of compassion, and I like to say that transparency is contagious. And so just like we had the Me Too movement where voices speak up, starting with Black women, then other people speak up, that also, as Naomi told her story, so many others came forward to say, yes, I have social anxiety. I think Viola Davis was one of the people who came forward and spoke, and people talk about struggling with depression, and Michelle Williams just published a book on her fight with depression. And so there is a gift in us creating space to honor our humanity, that we do not have to be the mules of the world, that we have feelings. We don't have to just be goddesses and super women, but that we bleed. And it is important for the world to be aware of that. So I'm so honored for us focusing specifically today on Black women.
Thank you. Kaija?
Yes, I am. I'm so grateful to be here to share this panel with all of you. I too have been thinking about Naomi and her decision that she made before the world, right? Young, gifted, talented, absolutely talented and beautiful. But her decision was not only a mile marker for her, but also her generation, right? So I think was also significant. That's what I took from that whole experience, and helping her generation understand how important it is to stand up and say, no, I'm not ready for this. This is not who I am. This is not the road that I want to go down. And I need time and I need space, and I need the world to honor my time and space. I think it's significant also to many of us who watched her and read her actual post. Again, social media, right, is how she had an opportunity to put it out. I sense that she's a creative person, very artistic. She writes extremely well in the sense that she was able to communicate to us, right, in writing. But oftentimes for us as Black women, we struggle so hard to be on top of the game all the time, to be present and make sure that our words are clear and we articulate. I don't like that word myself all the time, but we always have to be present and ready to answer the questions, no matter how consuming they can be on our heart and our mind. And I just think that she represented a generation that's coming forth that's saying, no, I want to protect my space. I want to protect my home. I want to protect my heart. And I applaud her for doing that.
Thank you, Kaija. So let's continue this conversation. Since Naomi put this back into global spotlight, if you will, let's take that spotlight and let's come back home and let's look at the past year. During the pandemic, many Black women have suffered traumas and losses. And I would like to ask the panel, open it up to everyone, how have the traumas and losses that occurred last year impacted Black women, specifically in regards to mental health? Dr. Oni?
Sure, I'll get started. Yeah, it sort of reminds me of like that saying about so when a certain community gets a cold, a more marginalized community gets pneumonia. Mm-hmm. It feels like that, at least with the pandemic for Black women and many women of color in terms of the impact. And then one example potentially is really around, intimate partner violence and domestic violence. I think many of us have heard about how during the pandemic, many of the measures taken to slow the spread of the pandemic also escalated the risk of violence for women who are survivors. And we know that Black women are disproportionately represented among domestic violence survivors in terms of risk was increased because there's more time at home, of course, increased levels of household stress, as well as, having increased access to advocacy, to direct support services that are available. We know during the pandemic that, many people lost their jobs. When we look at women, those who lost their jobs were primarily in Black and Latina women who were primarily in the childcare and hospitality sectors. And so that left many women who are survivors of domestic violence unemployed. We know we have affordable housing crisis here in the United States that was made worse by the pandemic. And so, we know that women were facing housing insecurity before the pandemic, and things were made worse when COVID-19 came. So just to say that when we look at, and in particular, because one of my interests in intimate partner violence, we see that it had very far-reaching effects, and obviously women were much more at risk. And we know that though that risk and experiencing, whether it's psychological or physical violence or financial abuse, leads to increases in the rates of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder and other suicidal thoughts and behaviors. So there are just many aspects of the pandemic: losing jobs, being part of a household that is stressed financially. All of these things, I think, for all women, but particularly for Black women, were heightened during the pandemic and have implications both for obviously mental health as well as physical health.
Kaija?
Yeah, I think in having much conversations with a lot of friends and colleagues and coworkers, particularly in this government mountain space that I've worked in, the biggest challenges that we have seen mostly is just how to cope with the different stresses of working in an environment that's not typically your work environment, right? So, you have mom, signing into work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you have your children sitting at the table right next to you signing into school. So that balance and understanding what that balance should look like, and not having, a template on what that should be like, was very challenging, right? Very stressful. I think there have been many statistics out there that has spoken to this fact that a lot of women of color particularly, have decided to leave their corporate America space or their workspace, whatever that is, to dedicate more time to family, right? To dedicate more time in ensuring that their children maintain what they need to stay in school, to stay at the levels of their of the other children. But I think the biggest thing that we have noticed, particularly in my circle in this government space, is this anxiety that rises, and we're finding that so many African-American women of color in general, working at very senior levels, and then having to balance and manage this new space without being present in actual physical form. It just, for me and a lot of my friends, a lot of us have seen the tensions that it's caused. And then you're thrown into it, right? We were all thrown into this space March of last year. It took most of us 4 or 5 months to kind of adjust. And then, oh, by the way, we were dealing with issues like what happened in Minneapolis and across our country, with so many African-American young men losing their lives, across not only young men, young women. So that trauma, right? And also not being able to speak about it at the corporate virtual table, just recognizing that we have to tuck that feeling away as a Black woman, as we're listening to our brothers and sisters going through the challenges that they are going through. So for me, and what I've saw with many of us, some of us had to make a decision, a gut check, right? Like, do I want to continue in this space or not? And some of us have left. Some of us decided to go into other areas that we've learned that we have a better niche at, right? Teaching or education or graphic design. We found ourselves in this space. So it wasn't all too bad. But then again, I do believe that having to adjust with that trauma also teaches us how to really appreciate the butterflies that come out of those trauma spaces. So that's pretty much how I've spent some of my year over the past year in dealing with the trauma.
I'm so glad that we're starting with this issue of trauma, because it is pervasive and the impact is in the immediate, but it's also long lasting in terms of its consequences. And so Black women globally have high levels of stress, high levels of responsibility, where often we say, oh, you have a large social network, but we have to look at how much of that network is actual mutual or reciprocal, or women being in positions of caretaker for everyone else on their job, in their community, in their families. And so there is the everyday stress that Black women manage, and then there is traumatic stress. And so the traumatic stressors are those events that are disruptive to our normal way of coping. So it can make it hard to regulate our emotions. And we know all the stereotypes that then exist about Black women and our emotions. It makes it disruptive to our identity and to our relationships. And so we have high rates of sexual assault within the US. The only group that has a higher rate than us are Native American, American Indian women. For intimate partner violence, severe violence, including homicide, we have increased risk. For domestic sex trafficking, Black girls face the highest risk. When we look at global human trafficking, there is racism even within human trafficking, where people will pay more for a European woman, a little less for Latina and Asian women, and the cheapest of all is to buy an African woman. And so we look at the ways in which we are exploited. Within pornography, images with women of color are more likely to incorporate violence. And so it is now somehow pleasurable, and I shouldn't say now, past and present, that people gain pleasure by causing us pain. And so what is the impact of these traumas? Not including, we also have higher rates of incarceration. and looking at the realities of police brutality. The stories that often get highlighted are the experiences of Black men, as they should be, but there are also many, many experiences of Black women and girls. And so the impact of these traumas can often show up with depression, but our depression can look different. So there is kind of the traditional depression people expect of someone looking sad, but there's also irritable depression. And so you wonder about this piece where people say Black women have an attitude, right? What is that attitude? It is distress, but people don't respond to our distress with compassion. That it can also show up in our health and in our bodies, but we get a lot of blaming around issues of weight or looking at lack of exercise. If people only look at the individual and not our context, they do not often respond with compassion. Even looking at issues of substance dependence or suicidality, that often the wounds of Black women get ignored. Audre Lorde, Black feminist poet, said, "This woman is Black, so her blood is shed in silence." And so we have high rates of trauma and low rates of compassion toward our trauma. So it's important globally that we attend to the realities of stress and trauma, including the societal trauma of oppression on Black women's lives.
Dr. Thema mentioned this aspect of traditional depression over irritable depression. And I'm glad you pointed that out, Dr. Thema, is because I think most of us going through what we experienced last year, we didn't know, we couldn't put a finger on it. We didn't understand it. We hadn't been trained in it. We never had to really identify with it. So this definition of irritable depression was common, I think, throughout the globe, particularly amongst our African-American women, because we didn't know what it was like, and it was irritable, right? And we couldn't put our finger on it, and we didn't have anybody to talk to about it. So I liked how you you defined it in such a way that we can identify with it, because when people look at traditional depression, we often put a name on that, things like we use words like crazy or out of their mind or not with us today, words that stigmatize depression. Yeah. But in all actuality, the globe was depressed. Yes. Yes. But I like how you put identified irritable depression. That's so wonderful. I like that word.
I appreciate you naming that, especially during the pandemic, which is a medical trauma, a global pandemic, and we often are told to kind of act like things are business as usual, as you have kind of children in the background online and you haven't been out of your house, or all of these worried about your elders. But I think so many times in our community, it is more acceptable to be angry than to be sad. People equate sadness often with weakness, and they can equate anger with strength. And so there can be, this being short-tempered. It means like, you're fiery, right? Or you're empowered, but to show the vulnerability, often it has not felt safe. And one other expression I want to say of our distress is something called somatic complaints. So those are physical conditions that may not have a medical cause, but are really related to our stress. And so Black women may say things like, "I'm not depressed," but they always get migraines. Or they'll say, "I don't have anxiety," but they're nauseous. We say we have a lot of backache in our community. So these bodies are telling a story, even while with our mouths we say, "I'm blessed," right? I'm blessed, but this body is saying something else.
Yes. I was doing a lot of reading, just trying to get to your levels, which is no small feat. But going back to Dr. Thema, what you were saying about we internalize, not just we being Black women, but people in general just internalize, going back to the example, backaches or being nauseous or just being achy. But then also, and I would like to pose this to everyone, or specifically Dr. Thema, doesn't that present itself to become an alcoholic, to have eating disorders, to I think it's called cutting, to really harm the body in ways that some people just couldn't think about, but that's a release, if you will, or a lack of recognition.
Mm-hmm. And it's so important that you made that connection, because often people just judge the behavior. Say like, you know, this person needs to stop doing this behavior, not looking at what is the source of the cause of their distress, right? There's a why. You know, we make sense as human beings. Sometimes we feel like we don't make sense, but if you look at the layout of a person's life, whether it's their history or their present, it will make more sense. And so often we, you know, look at the realities of medicating our pain and a lack of access to healthcare, including mental health care. You should know that only about 4% of psychologists are Black in America, and of course, globally, even less representation. And so people are looking at ways to survive. And while there are these beneficial ways, both cultural ways, spiritual ways, and therapeutic ways, not everyone is aware of those or has access to those. And so as you name, the cutting can be a way of, I don't feel anything, but if I can see the blood, then I know I'm still here, right? That everything I've been holding in, I can have some release. Or with the substances, and you know, we look at within many of our communities, they're on every other corner, you know, that it is systemic and structural, where we cannot have a supermarket in certain neighborhoods with fresh food, but somehow we can have a liquor store. We can't have a bank, but we can have a check cashing place. Mm-hmm. So it is, the system is designed in such a way that does not promote our wellness. And so that is what we often see in terms of people's behavior. Even when people talk about aggression, it's, you know, if you put people in a small environment with limited resources and limited possibilities and wonder why they're competing for the little bit of resources there, they are. So we have to look at the larger picture to understand people's not only physical symptoms, but the ways in which we show up in the world.
Yes, that's certainly true. On that note, I feel like there's a common thread or theme that's percolating, quote unquote, the strong Black woman stereotype. So Oni, how do we as a community and as allies recognize and eliminate these long-held systemic and structural beliefs of the strong Black woman archetype?
Right. Yeah. So I think, you know, typically it's meant, I think, often as a compliment. And I think many times as Black women, we receive it very positively. I think compared to when we think about other stereotypes that are commonly associated with Black women, like the Jezebel stereotype, or us being loud or lazy, whatever it is. So I think because it's not considered, you know, necessarily a pejorative or negative stereotype, you know, many times we often, you know, feel, you know, flattered if someone calls us or praised, you know, if someone calls us superwoman. And because Black women, because of all of these structural forces, we've had to, you know, overcome so many various barriers. But the reality is when we internalize the strong Black women stereotype, what really ends up often happening is that, you know, when we need support, when we need help, we often are alone. We don't necessarily reach out and seek it. And so many times we're alone coping with our own issues as opposed to having the collective coping or seeking community care. So yeah, just to say, I think it's something that's very prevalent. And I think we need to, you know, normalize Black women, you know, reaching out for help, but also creating, the onus shouldn't just be on us. Like there should be structures in place that ensure that, you know, Black women get the support they need. I think to Dr. Thema's point about, you know, the low percentage of Black providers who are psychotherapists, like we need, you know, to increase the capacity of therapists, other mental health providers who, you know, understand sort of the unique factors and stresses and stressors that Black women are under, the people that understand the ways that dual oppression of racism and sexism sort of impacts, you know, our ability to be able to take care of ourselves. Again, we're often in caregiving roles. We're often responsible to take care of children, parents, other members of our family. We're very spread thin. I'm an HIV physician, and so I know, at least within HIV, you know, often women struggle with adherence to their HIV treatment And it's interesting, while they're pregnant, they actually tend to be really adherent to their treatment. But then when they have their babies, are not, because they're taking care of the baby, right? And so we need to figure out, what are the policies, what are the larger sort of structural forces that can be changed so that Black women are supported and can, thrive and be the highest versions of ourselves.
I'm so glad you're naming that piece of thriving, because often we are stuck in survival mode of just trying to make it. And the surviving is an accomplishment. Dr. Maya Angelou said, surviving is necessary, but thriving is elegant. And so we want to create the space for Black women to be able to flourish and to thrive. And in terms of the strong Black woman, one psychologist has conceptualized it as the superwoman syndrome. And among Black women, there is often this pressure to sacrifice yourself, to erase yourself, to be strong for everyone else. And so you can see why that would be praised, right? People like it when you erase yourself and put all of their needs first. People will enjoy it when you don't ever need anything, but you have it and you can carry everyone else. And unfortunately, that gets passed down to the next generation. There's a saying in the Black American community that mothers love their sons and raise their daughters. And so the raising of the daughter is teaching her responsibility, teaching her how to take care of the house, take care of everyone else, go get a job, get an education. And so we can say, well, yes, now that shows up with a spirit of excellence, but sometimes at the cost of our mental and physical and spiritual health. Interestingly, Black women who rate high in the superwoman syndrome have rate very low in condom negotiation. So feeling uncomfortable advocating for, asking or requiring their partners to use protection, right? So I'm super strong, but yet I can't speak for things that would protect my own wellness. So we have to disrupt and reimagine what is strength. And we also need to create spaces where Black women can become undone. And that's, a big saying of, like we were talking before we started, is your hair done? Is your face done? Is, done, all like ready, I'm ready. And, don't shame us, right? So is there place, for our tears? Is there place for us to say, I'm tired? And I think sometimes there is a survivor's guilt that we have, because it is true, we come from a legacy of people who fought so hard. And I have been, a person who has done that as well, where I feel like for everything my ancestors went through, like, how dare I, sit back and say I'm tired from 5 Zooms? Like, come on. So we can oppress ourselves in that way. And so there is a need for a part of our resistance to be tenderness, right? That Black women deserve tenderness.
Yes.
I wanted to also point out on the word strong. It is not one of my favorite words. I have to admit that, only because oftentimes you hear it in the military spaces. I'm speaking to my veterans and those who might be on the call listening in. That's something that we are drilled to be, and that is strong, right? Especially if you're on the officer side of the military, which is that side that is often the leading individuals, leading of the troops. But I say this, and when I hear the word strong, I think of 2 biblical characters that when I would hear it, I would keep them in mind, and that is the characters Deborah and Jael. You cannot be strong without having a left-right support, someone there to kind of guide you and help you along the way. I think that is a sign of strength, is knowing that you have an accountability partner with you to see you through the end. And I oftentimes, say that what's most important to me and my circle of friends is that we can become completely undone in front of each other so that we're strengthened. And when we turn outward facing to the troops or outward facing at the corporate desk table, we're completely put together and pulled together because we know we have a tribe that's standing behind us, blowing their wind in our direction to ensure that, back is straight, head is up, and we can always become whatever we need to be in their presence. But I think that's so important, is to have a community and tribe of sisters. This concept of sisterhood and strength, it's connected, right? You need for them to be together, to work together, just to continue each day.
Yeah. On that note, it's very important to have a tribe, right? I do have my tribe, and I hope everyone listening has their tribe. Even if it's a tribe of 2, that's a tribe. It's a tribe of 1, that's a tribe. Since we have an MD, a PhD.
I just wanted to just share a quick quote before we just go on to the next thing. This is like one of my favorite quotes that I heard. It's by a Buddhist teacher, Maya Jaya Sati Bhagavati. Says, learn to drink as you pour, so the spiritual heart cannot run dry, and you always have love to give. And it just kind of reminded me of what Dr. Thema was saying, just how we start at a very young, when little Black girls are young, holding them to these very high standards and responsibilities. And so we need to, as we raise our girls, impress upon them how important it is to fill their own cups first before everyone else's. So I just wanted to share that quote. I'm happy to put it in the chat as well, but it's something I go back to often.
And thank you. Where did you take the quote from again?
So it's Majaya Sati Bhagavati. I'll write her name. She's a Buddhist, I think she's passed, but a Buddhist teacher.
Thank you for that, Oni. So since we do have an MD, a PhD, and a soon to be another PhD, Kaija, who's defending soon, let's go back to that concept of a tribe. How do you, as a woman, as a member of your tribe, support another member of your tribe that you see that's flailing, or checking in just to say, are you really okay? I see you, you don't look okay. How do you carry that forth or interact with that person to let them know that you're there for them, you're there to help whatever you can do, even if that means to drive you to the doctor because you just physically can't get out of the bed?
Yeah, is it okay if I start with that and responding to that? This is one of my passions with my own story, in my own loss and losing my dear husband to suicide. I find it very important to have these kind of conversations. And it goes beyond just asking the question, are you okay? But questions something like along the lines of, how was your day? What did you do today? What did you eat? To kind of get at the root of what might be troubling either my friend or coworker or colleague, male or female, white, Black, brown, purple, because it is I do my due diligence to ensure not to let a conversation go by without knowing that the person on the other end that I'm speaking with or visually engaging is beyond okay. Right? I think it's important to, first of all, be transparent, right? I think when people know that they can have a transparent conversation with you and that you can help them get to a point to admit that, I think I want to talk to someone, or, how you engage me, I never even considered it before, or for me, I have a couple of people that I could reach out to or send them to just for conversation, because sometimes it's not that deep. It's just that I just really don't feel like getting out of my pajamas today. And I'm okay with that, and it's like, girl, do you want me to come over with you? We'll just be in pajamas together. And that by itself is a wonderful feeling, right? To the more extreme on that whole continuum of seeking help, where they need to talk to someone that can provide them professional understanding on what they need to do to get through the day, the week, the month, or the year. I think I've become this advocate for ensuring that people are heard, right? Sometimes people just want to be heard. Like, I just need to get it out. I need to upchuck it. It needs to go somewhere besides inside of me. And that helps as well. I have a group of friends that I meet with quarterly, and this has become our way of staying connected. They're professional Black women, and we all work in different spheres of industries within the Northeast, but we make it our business to come together and to talk over whatever we need to talk. And then we do intermediate check-ins throughout those 3 or 4 months, but we physically come together and celebrate each other. It could be something as simple as a candle or a t-shirt that says, hi, my name is, or whatever. I think those kind of engagements are necessary, especially as we get to those middle ages of our years, and especially our young people between 17 and 35 or 32. I think it's the highest rate of suicide amongst that generation, amongst that group of young folks. I think it's time that we really set aside some time to really engage them. Now that we're about to transition out of this COVID isolated space to where everybody's going to be open and free, now it's like, what do I do? Where do I go first? Who do I talk to? It's so much to touch on and be a part of that I think is very important. To just transparency is so key, right? And then holding on and trust. Trust is also a part of that continuum. They have to know that they can trust you with their treasures, and that's their heart. So transparency, connection, communication, as well as openness is a part of it all for me.
I will definitely echo what you just described. I have an incredible circle of sisters we call the Gathering. And pre-COVID, we would meet once a month in my home, and then we had to switch to Zoom during these pandemic times. And it is important to have a circle of people who you consider peers, right? That often, quote unquote, strong Black women may be in a lot of one-sided relationships where you are the giver of advice, where you are the giver of support, where you are the resource. And so you can come out of those, if that's all you have, feeling very drained and empty. And that's when you have people saying, like, I don't want friends, right? Because it's not really friendship what they're describing. They're describing being the resource for everyone else. So, you know, this circle of women are really incredible women. And we have created a climate of transparency where we can feel comfortable sharing the areas in which we are struggling. And the beautiful part about a circle is even when a few people are in a difficult place, there are some people present who are in a stronger place or a more stable place. And so, so that it is not the pressure on one person, we eat and spend the first hour kind of checking in about what is going on with us. And then in the second hour, we each share something that has been laid on our heart to try to nourish the group. It might be a poem, it might be a devotional, it might be a song, it may be, you know, just something that we were writing about over the course of the month and feel led to share so that everyone leaves having received. And that has been such a gift. The other piece I will say, along with transparency being contagious, is our body language and our time tell a story. Sometimes when you say to someone, how are you? They can tell you don't really want to know, right? It's like, I'm asking like, hey, how you doing? Right? I'm moving. So before, you know, you need to say fine quickly, and you ask me, and I'm gonna say fine too, right? But if I slow down and say, no, really, I'm asking what's going on with you, right? So just slow it all the way down and communicate to people that I have the time and the interest and the care to know what's really happening. And, you know, people have encouraged asking a deeper question, like, how are you managing with everything that is going on? You know, that gives a pulse for more information. And then I also have to be willing to share more information, right? Because some people are vigilant or have trust issues. And so it's not just like that I'm trying to get in your business, but I am willing to share what's been challenging for me. And then we create a space for that. It is so important. And the last thing I'll just say is when we are in touch with our own vulnerability and really honest with ourselves about our moment of struggle, it is easier to recognize it in another sister, in another woman, right? If you have ever lived through a season where you were barely getting sleep and when you were holding your breath, when I see a woman holding her breath and holding her body tight, I know what that is, not just because I'm a practitioner, but because I have been there. So then I pay attention to what I see and can name that and ask about it.
Yes, I think all, yes, and with what Dr. and Dr. Have said, I need to grow a circle because that's one thing that I don't have. And you know, it's interesting during this pandemic, actually when the pandemic was beginning, I was dealing with depression and now, at the moment doing much better, but have had about 4 close girlfriends also dealing with depression during this. So even just small things like I'm thinking of you. I know when I was feeling depressed, I didn't want to talk to anyone. So I would just be like, I'm thinking of you. I want to let you know that I'm here for you. You know, if you want to talk, just let me know. I understand if you don't want to talk, because I remembered how I felt. Also, like with many friends, I'm sort of used to a certain pattern of, you know, it's hard now since we don't see people as much. Everything's, you know, it's virtual. So just sort of when I see it, I detect a change in sort of the pattern of texts, like the rhythm, you know, it's slowed down. I'm like, like what's going on there? Just checking in, and almost always, you know, someone is dealing with a challenge. You know, I most recently, I guess, because I'm an avid Twitter person and follow Dr. Thema on there, you know, had posted about one of my girlfriends is looking for a mental health provider, a Black woman who centers Christianity in her practice. So, you know, she is obviously not in a space right now to be looking for a provider who fits the bill. So I am like, I will get that information for you. So just trying to be there, you know, when I'm resourced, to be there for my friends when they're not, and hoping that they are there for me during my points when I'm struggling. And just sending like little gifts of appreciation, sent like books of poetry during the pandemic, short stories, just to friends who, you know, I was just trying to make sure I listened in when they said there was something that they wanted or something that they were thinking about, just to like take note of that and send to let them know that I appreciate them, and they're in my thoughts, and I'm sending my love to them. So those are just some little things, but I need to work on building my circle.
I'm building mine too, so we all are, right? We make new friends, but it gets harder as you get more mature, right? For sure. Now, Kai-Asia, you touched on suicide and how the rates are increasing. I think you said the band was 17 to 32 or 17 to 35. I would like to pose this question to Dr. Thema. Suicide rates are increasing for even younger adults or kids, based off whether they want to end their life because students at school make fun of their skin, or because students at school make fun of the fact that they identify as a girl. How do we as parents, as mentors, as aunties and uncles, how do we get down to their level? Just like we're saying we have our own tribe as mature adults, how do we say that we see you, we feel for you, we're here for you, talk to me, what can we do to help you thrive?
Yeah, such an important piece. And often I am startled by the way not only Black women are left out of the conversation, but Black girls. And it is so important that we center in and look at what are some of the reasons why Black girls are often overlooked. And I will go back to my own training. When I was doing my internship in graduate school, I, politely went to the supervisor and told him, I really want to work. This was a child community guidance center. So I really want to work with depressed girls. And he just kind of nodded. And I noticed week after week, all my referrals were aggressive boys, right? Conduct disorder boys. And I'm like, did he not hear like my little request? So I went back to him and I'm like, I don't know if you remember, but I really want to work with depressed girls. And he said, Thema, depressed girls fly under the radar. The people who get mandated to therapy or recommended to therapy are disruptive. And so the principal and the teachers notice the ones who are fighting. The parents notice the ones who are, pushing back against their authority. But a depressed girl can go through 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. If you don't say anything and aren't quote unquote disturbing anybody, that no one is tuned in or checked in. So I want to name us not overlooking the silence or assuming silence means all is well. Mm-hmm. And even those of us, some of us who coped with a spirit of excellence, right? So they, sometimes the grades fall, but sometimes people just become very driven of like, I have to be successful, or I have to do great, or I have to make people proud of me. But under that is an anxiety or a depression. And so one of the ways that can help our children to open up, one is releasing our amnesia. I think sometimes as adults, we forget how hard it was growing up. And we say things like, you don't have any bills, right? Like, why should you be worried? You don't even have to deal with a mortgage or rent. I wish I had nap time. We like idealize it, but it's like, have we forgotten? Like those were some really, really rough times where you don't really have a lot of power and a lot of other people are shaping your life. And so to not minimize or dismiss people's pain, I would even say like the invisible losses of COVID-19, that if kids can't see their friends or miss their prom or graduation, or had to celebrate their birthday by themselves, or the parents don't have the money to get what other kids have. These are really, really hard things. And so, the way we can create in our homes a culture of transparency is, what I started doing with my kids is at the end of each day at dinner, we go around the table and say, what was the best thing about today and what was the worst thing? And I give an answer too, like an honest answer. So then it lets them know it's okay to say. Some people will say things like, no complaining. Well, now that's like toxic positivity, where if it's not a blessing, you can't talk about it, right? And I'll notice where the shift is, right? Because sometimes I can predict what they're going to say. Usually my daughter's worst thing is homework, right? That's like every day my worst things. But then some days it's something different, right? So I'm tuned in because I'm tracking it, right? So not waiting until things are at level 10 before we check in.
Thank you. And still keeping, Kaisha did send in the chat box, suicide is the 2nd leading cause of death for ages 10 through 34.
Yeah, and I'm just now looking at some statistics amongst our young Black girls in America, and from the ages 13 to 19, between 2001 and 2017, suicide has increased 182%. Now that is really, really high, and I think this is worth something. What we usually have not done is looked at that age group between 10 to 34 and really broken down the different diversities within that age group. I'm so used to studying it from a different perspective, right? Looking at male, female, at the higher age group levels, but that's really astounding. So I think this gives me some time to do some homework in my own research and looking at, what it looks like amongst our African American, as well as our Latino population, brown and Black girls in that stage. But 182%, that's high for a period of 16 years.
Now, Kaisha, the subject of suicide really touches home for you deeply. And can you share a little bit about your experience with suicide awareness and prevention?
Yeah, I think I touched on this a little bit earlier. I lost my husband, Hurley Shields. Both of us were majors in the United States Army serving on active duty. Back in 2008 is when he passed. due to death by suicide. And since that time, of course, I had to go through my own that trauma, right? I had to go through my own time of help, healing, and hope, is how I describe my journey, because I needed to understand what help was like, being a strong, independent Black woman and having to totally commit myself over to being receiving help and knowing what that looked like, all the way through the healing process and understanding what tribes really commit to the healing process. This advocacy to help people be aware that suicide is in our communities, death by suicide attempts is really high amongst our young generation, that same age group, 10 to 34. Also, if you look at it between female and male, and you break it down between Black, white, Latino, and others, it is rising in that space of women in general, as well as attempts. So you have more males that died by suicide. However, the attempts of suicide is being, the numbers are going up in that area amongst your women. So what does that mean? And what does that say to all of us? I think first it says that suicide is not a myth, that it is happening within our Black, brown communities, and is happening amongst our young people and our women population. Well, what does that mean even more, Kaija? Really ringing the bell for how people can receive help, what type of help is available, and that mental health assistance, behavioral health assistance is not just for a stigmatized group of people. It's for the gamut of all of us. All of us have mental health concerns. It just depends on the extremes of what that mental health looks like on the continuum of mental health, behavioral health assistance. So for me, over the past few years, I've become this community advocate for let's talk about it. I've done a couple of series in my community within Prince William County, Virginia, that really reaches out to different areas of the community, fire department, police department, school system, hospitals, bringing those community leaders together to simply have a conversation. Our faith-based organizations, right? Which, oh my gosh, we could just have another session just talking about faith-based and suicide alone. That is a whole nother hour block. But I say that to say that bringing people together to help people understand. And oh, by the way, what really drove me to write the book was a death of a young lady in our community that was 17 years old. And the loss of her life, African-American young girl, just took me, it caused my own trauma to be revisited. And it caused me to say, I have to write the book to talk about this in our communities and why our young people are making decisions that shouldn't quite be so much their decisions to make at this time at an early age. So I believe I'm an advocate for it, not only talking about it, but also connecting people to the right people, like Dr. Bryant and Dr. Oni Black on this particular call. So they can say, hey, this is how I could better serve you. I may not be able to get you to point A, but I know someone that can and will. One thing we mentioned earlier is experiences shape us. We become subject matter experts in being able to help other people identify what's really going on with them. You don't have to be a doctor to know that or recognize, you know what, her pattern has changed. We need to connect or figure out what's going on with her. I think it's because of our experiences that shape us. We become this subject matter expert to be able to identify what's going on, not only within ourselves, but within our community. So again, a true advocate for it in all spaces. And I'm not sure if we have the suicide prevention hotline listed. We could post it in the chat, but I think that's something that's definite, the national hotline that needs to be available. And I know that Dr. Bryant has other points of contacts and references that we might need to include in that chat as well. because some people don't always believe in the national suicide hotline, right? They want to be able to go to some place that looks similar to us here on this call. So if we could put that in the chat, that would be great.
Yes, Kaija, on that note, we do have a resource toolkit that we have that we will share, that there are numbers there. And based off this conversation, things that percolated up through this conversation will also be added to that toolkit as well.
Thank you. I forgot about that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for sharing. I know that sometimes it doesn't matter how long ago, how distant, how recent, it still touches. So I thank you for that. Oh my gosh, it's 7:35. I would like to get one question through, but let's go to questions and answers from the audience. Kelly, would you like to take over?
Sure, thank you. And we have a ton of questions, so we'll try to get to them, all of them, and if not, we will absolutely try to get them answered for you all post-event. So this first one is for Kaija, and it's a two-part question, Kaija. It is, well, one, this person is a veteran, and they wanted to know if the VA offers mental health services with African American providers specifically.
Well, thank you for that question, whoever asked that question. Yes, well, the VA is a very good source for those that are on the call that are veterans and have healthcare assistance through the VA, right? And if you are looking for mental health care, behavioral health care, I would strongly advocate that you reach out to your provider within the VHA world and actually speak to someone to make that happen. Now, here's what I'm going to be honest and transparent with you with. A lot of times, I think Dr. Bryant mentioned this earlier, that there are not a lot of African-American women or men in the profession of mental health, behavioral health, right? There's not, it's not a plethora. So if you go and you call and there's about 20 Thaimas out there, there's not, okay? You're going to have to be an advocate for yourself and for your mental health care. You're going to have to try and try and try again. You're going to have to be persistent and consistent in your ask, particularly when it comes into this VA-VHA space. VHA is a huge healthcare medical care resource that is out there for a lot of our veterans, and they don't always get it right on the first go, right? But it's up to you to be an advocate. I'm always telling people this: you are your own #1 advocate for your own healthcare. So it's up to you to continue to push those buttons in pursuing the right person or persons to ensure that you get to, you know, what you are looking for in the actual doctor or doctors to be your healthcare provider when it comes to mental health space. So I can't say, yes, they have a plethora of African-American women per se, but I can say if you continue to look for that help, you will get it. Also keep in mind that it is outsourced, right? So all of the mental health care providers may not be inside of the VHA wall, but they may be outside, external, right? So you can get referred to assistance outside within your local community that will get you exactly what you're looking for.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next question is, and this could be posed to anyone on the panel, is how do we navigate mental health as Black, people of color, Muslim, without trustworthy mental health in place? Specifically, when our communities have been and or are policed and under surveillance with mental health used as a quote unquote flag for criminality or terrorism, uses vulnerability support hubs to screen for quote unquote terrorists as young as age 6. It seems and or feels like that when we can't let our guard down or seek help openly or show vulnerability still, it is very difficult. Do you have any advice or insights on that?
Yes. Thank you so much for naming that reality. And in psychology, we have something called healthy paranoia, right? Sometimes people say, oh, you're being paranoid because you think people are after you. But when you live in a society where there are actually people and systems that are after you, then it requires this level of vigilance and thought about, I don't just have trust issues, I am aware that there are those who are not only lacking compassion, but actually racist or holding Islamophobia. And so it is important that we as a community be empowered to know you have the right to shop around and to interview a potential mental health provider. Sometimes we think, well, whoever I was assigned to, that's who I'm stuck with, or we don't feel like we can ask people questions. And so to be willing to ask the questions of, if you're a potential therapist in that first meeting, because the therapist is also meeting with you for the first time to decide if it's a match. So you should be trying to figure out, are you a match, right? So you can ask them, what is your understanding of the impact of racism on mental health? And if the therapist says, well, I don't think in terms like that, or I think people just make excuses, or, well, I know things like the Klan exists, but besides that, I think people, all that will let you know to exit, right? Like this, you are not my place. In terms of, being Muslim, being able to say, what is your experience integrating faith and therapy, right? You can ask them the questions, and people who are tuned in to culture, to race, to spirituality will give you a ready answer without any defensiveness or without trying to read into what you're saying. And so we build trust over time. And so what often happens when people come in for counseling, and I don't take it personally, it's a survival strategy, is people may come in with their legs crossed, their arms crossed, coat buttoned up, purse in their lap, right? And they're side-eyeing me. And I say, yeah, you don't know me, right? So, it's not then for me to grill someone, it's for me to join them on that side of the table, that it makes sense that you don't want to tell me too much at this point. So whatever piece you're willing to share, we'll start there. And so, seeing the tone of the person will let you know if this is a safe place, and then being clear about the confidentiality that we can lose our license, literally, if we're out making calls or just like reporting you for things that, we are only able to break your confidence in cases of physical child abuse, elder abuse, and if you are currently saying like, I'm suicidal and I can't make a safety contract with you, or if you name a person that you specifically want to harm. Those are the only times where we can go tell someone what you said. And a responsible clinician, will tell you that at the beginning when you meet with them. So then you kind of share accordingly. There are resources like Association of Black Psychologists. So ABPSI is the organization. There is also inclusivetherapist.com. And there's therapyforblackmen.com, therapyforblackgirls.com. So there are those of us who are doing the work. And if you are matched with a therapist of a different race or a different religion, it doesn't mean automatically that they won't get it. What you're checking to see is authenticity and humility, right? Because I've worked with clients who are of a different faith or of a different race, or different sexual orientation, but like, what is my tone? And that lets people know, like, can I trust this person? And I believe with the forthrightness of your question, that you have the discernment, you will be able to detect if somebody is trustworthy.
I would just add all the wonderful content that Thema just said. I think also word of mouth can be also helpful. So other, friends, family members who have had positive experiences with certain mental health providers, just asking for references, recommendations can also be super helpful. Kind of reminds me of like a the green book that was used in the South, Black people can stay, where to go, where we're safe. And it's sort of similarly, asking your community, your family for recommendations can also be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to try to squeeze in a few more, and then the rest we'll tackle offline. This next one is open to anyone on the panel as well. So you had talked about earlier in the conversation this evening how we as Black women have to curb or tuck away our feelings about racism. After last year and the killing of George Floyd, many corporations invested or have a quote unquote new renewed interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many of us have been tapped or been voluntold to lead departmental education efforts on racism and really African American history in general, in addition to doing our everyday workload. Can you guys talk a bit about Black fatigue and how we can manage it internally and externally at work?
Great question. Were you about to go, Dr. Ani? Okay. So this is so true. So many corporations were putting their statement up, Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, and then the employees are saying, what's the follow-up, right? What are you doing? And so many have, and this has been documented, have pledged these large amounts of money that they have not spent nor provided. And so if it is important to the corporation, they will put money behind it, including either paying you additionally or hiring outside consultants. And so often people will pay the bare minimum or do what they can get away with. And so to be able to communicate to them, I'm so glad that you're following up on this initiative. And one of the ways that we translate if a company means what they're saying is what they put their dollars behind. So having me do it for free really does not reflect well for the company. And so I would encourage you to look at your budget and to research the people who have expertise in this so that we can continue, to bring this work forward. It also helps when there's an outside person involved because they don't have the history or the power dynamics. They, if I come into a corporation, I can say whatever. They can't fire me, right? So there's a freedom that comes with an outside consultant being able to be a truth teller. And also people don't take it so personally, because when I come in and say something, I don't know the people in the same way. So I'm not really like talking about Frank, even though it's what Frank did last week, right? So there's a safety in that. But if we continue to do the labor for free, people will utilize us, and it's exploitation. And you can even say, if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but I was hearing about this concept of emotional labor and how Black women are more likely to be tasked with unpaid and unacknowledged responsibilities. And it leads to high turnover rate, low retention. And so I have been feeling fatigue, even though I'm enthusiastic about the topic. And if I'm burned out, I know other people are as well. So I would really like you to put some resources behind this to show your commitment.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Dr. Thema. So actually, I left a position at the New York City Health Department where I was an assistant commissioner, actually such a toxic experience, to start my own health equity, racial equity consulting business. So I do what Dr. Thema was talking about, like coming into organizations and assessing their policy practices, and it's very involved. And people, if you have a full-time job and you're not given extra time or resources to do this work, it doesn't make any sense. And so I totally agree with what Dr. Thema said in terms of there are many different consultants and companies that can do this work. And I think there are also opportunities just within wherever you're working for, for instance, racial affinity groups. Like there's work that white people, for instance, and Black people, but white people and other white people can begin together doing some of this emotional labor that's a part of racial equity work. It doesn't require having a Black person it. So yes, I agree with pointing your leadership towards existing resources and making sure that whatever is stated, what is aligns, like there are resources that are aligned with whatever is stated. So they're saying that this is a priority. So let's see them dedicate the time and resources to this.
Thank you for those answers. And I know we're really pressed for time. I'm squeezing one more in before I'm kicked out by Meisha and Stephanie. So this could be a round robin for each of you. What insights do you have or could you provide to someone who, even if they are sharing what they're going through and sharing their struggles, their surroundings or the people or their community or their families that are close to them aren't truly listening to those struggles or those needs?
Well, I think to answer that question, the first thing is a lot of times, you know, we may not be heard in our own communities because, like the carpenter's son, right? He was not recognized within his own hometown. And I think it's very important that we look for and be very dedicated and intentional. Intentionality is very important when it comes to your mental health care and healthcare in general. Look, I think it's very important that we get the message very clear to the audience that taking care of you is important these days, that we have to set aside, oh, no one's listening, no one's hearing me, and really be intentional about what's important to you and what's important to your health and what's important to your longevity. We need you here for a very long time. With long life, you will be satisfied, and we need you to be present in every and all things that you do. So I think it's very important to the person who asks that question that first, you know, that you continue to reach and seek out help outside of your community or what you may think your family nest might be, right? Oh, you're just okay. Oh, you'll be fine. Oh, don't worry about it. You'll get through it. You're the smartest thing in the pencil tab. You'll be okay. No, go outside of that layer where you can get and seek that professional assistance that you need to help you manage your day-to-day anxiety, your day-to-day stress, your day-to-day needs, because what our families sometimes don't realize is that what we're saying is really true. And they may not understand it because they knew you when, right? But they don't know you now, right? So continue to seek, to continue to look. There's help out there. Seek the resources that is in the chat. Start there. And I believe that if you continue to pursue it, you'll find exactly the help that you need.
Thank you, Kaisha.
So my theme will be release to receive, release to receive, release to receive, whether we're talking about friendship, family, jobs, or romantic partners. Sometimes we cling to things and people that are not fulfilling, or fear of loneliness, or fear that this is the best thing we could get, even though it does not fulfill us. And so to have the courage to let go. If I spend all my time with people who don't hear me, how will I meet people who will? And so it is like leaving one door before you see the next room, and being willing to walk through that hallway where the room I was in, I was already surrounded by people, but alone anyway. So I'm willing to take the risk of letting that go and going out. You know, the world is opening up a lot more, but also there are a lot of virtual spaces. So doing the things you enjoy, and you'll find people there, whether that's activism or poetry or faith-based groups, women's organizations, whatever it is, and to be open to the new. And I saw someone else that asked a question about trauma bonding, which is similar when we are holding on to a dysfunctional relationship. And, but I say it without any shame or judgment in it. It's when we're ready. So when you're ready to let go, trust that there are other people who will be more intentional about hearing you and seeing you.
Thank you. That's it for now. I'm sorry.
I know Stephanie's coming up, but Oni, did you have something to say? Or
No, I think just actually that quote that I mentioned, just I think we have to make sure that we, as Black women, are resourced, that our needs are being met before we are able to take care of everyone else. I think that there's a lot, I guess you call it self-betrayal. There's a lot of people pleasing that we often do, that I still do and have to be like conscious of. And really try to center ourselves and our priorities, our needs first, and then we can go and help everyone else. But yeah, so just my final point.
thank you, Oni. Stephanie's going to take over, but I just want to say for me personally, I am grateful for Dr. Thema, Kaija, and Oni for coming, joining us tonight and sharing their lived experiences, sharing their knowledge, and hopefully uplifting those who need a little lift tonight, and carry that forward to not only for yourselves, but to your community, to your friends, and be there for the women and girls that truly need help. And so thank you again. And without further ado, I'll pass it along to Stephanie.
Thanks, Meisha. Wow, what a conversation. I am so pleased to share that we have some winners. So before we wrap up, and thank you all for this incredible conversation, I want to share that we have a t-shirt winner in Siobhan John, congratulations. And we also have a winner of our gift card for Violet Joy Moore. I love that name. So thank you. We will reach out to you and get your information to get you your gifts. And Kelly, did you want to share the winners for the signed copy of the books?
Oh, I'll be emailing them.
Okay, perfect. So thank you all. And we saw some donations come in on the text to give. So thank you for your incredible generosity. And on behalf of the entire chapter and this entire audience, I just want to very humbly thank Dr. Oni Blackstock, Dr. Thema Bryant-Davis, Kaija Lane, and Meisha Williams-Bertels. This was a conversation that we will be sharing the recording of, and that we will carry forward from this whole series. And we shared the resource toolkit in the chat. So we'll also be sending that out to you so that you can look into some of the resources that were mentioned tonight. To the women on this panel, thank you for making such a difference for the world by sharing your expertise tonight. And for UN Women USA New York, we're really making a difference for the women all around the world tonight. So thank you. And Meisha, anything else to share before we close?
No, that's it. Other than everybody enjoy your evening, take what you learned, be there for your friend, and also be a friend to yourself and have boundaries. And so without further ado, here again, thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending, and hope to see you at our next event coming up soon.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Good night.